Republican former Congressman Bob Barr of Georgia, a state with double balloting concerns, allegations of wrongful voter rolls, and lots of others. He was Attorney General of the state of Georgia, and he was the Libertarian Party's presidential nominee in 2008. He's in Atlanta. All right, the big news of the day, of course, is Trump admitting that he knew the coronavirus was very bad, but he wanted to protect the public, so he led them down a different path. What do you make of that?
Well, it doesn't surprise me. I mean, there's a lot of balancing that has to go on whenever a president says something about something as consequential as a pandemic. And initially, I don't think a lot of people really understood, including the experts, exactly how insidious this virus really was. So, the president, I think, was trying to balance the need to not create panic, but not also say something that was not true, so that gives people a false sense of security. It's a very fine line there. I'm not sure that he really got it exactly right, but I understand what he was trying to do.
What about the reports that he called American troops losers and suckers at a World War I cemetery?
That makes no sense to me whatsoever. And the timing of it, of course, is very suspect. 2 years after the fact, I think it is, or at least a year and a half after the fact, for this to come out. Trump has a very blunt, sometimes over-the-top way of putting things, but I cannot imagine that he would say something like that in a way that people, including people that might use it against him, could overhear it. I mean, it's one thing to say that, to your spouse in the privacy of your own bedroom. It's quite another to say something so over the top when other people are there. So I discount that. That makes no sense to me, Larry.
Okay, last month you blogged that teachers who refuse to return to the classroom because of COVID-19 should be fired. You said they should stop acting like scared bunnies and grow up. Well, fired if they're worried about the health of their children and themselves, Bob?
I don't think it's so much that they should not worry about their health and that of their children. Certainly they should. But as we're seeing here in Georgia, to simply say, well, because there's a health problem, rather than take reasonable measures to ensure that teachers, administrators, and children are protected reasonably, we just won't have anybody come to school, and instead we'll rely on distance learning, which by any measure, and according to all the experts I've seen, is not a good way or a complete way for children to learn. My point is, Larry, that there are certainly ways that children could be brought back into the schools, reasonable measures be taken to protect them, and teach them at the same time, rather than have them sit home month after month after month and not benefit from the in-classroom experience, which is invaluable to their learning experience.
Bob, the ACLU has released a report that says Georgia likely removed nearly 200,000 Georgia citizens from the voter rolls after wrongly concluding that these folks had moved when in fact they never moved at all.
Well, we do have in Georgia a process that the Secretary of State is responsible for to ensure that the voter rolls are cleaned up on a regular basis. And if people move and are not receiving information, if they are not properly registered, or if they are registered in two different places, for example, if they move and then register at a new address, it is a legitimate responsibility of the Secretary of State to correct that. Whether or not there were mistakes made, I'm not sure yet. I certainly wouldn't just take the ACLU's word for it, but certainly it's worth looking into to make sure that the process was done properly.
Are you worried about November 3rd? Are you worried about the election, what might happen? Missed votes, wrong votes, panic in the streets?
I'm very worried about it, Larry. When I see what's been happening so far on the streets of many cities, and you sort of extrapolate from that how angry people are going to be regardless of the outcome of the election on November 3rd, I fear for the safety of our cities and our citizenry. People are so angry, so viscerally angry right now. that anything could happen. I'm very worried about it.
And the anger is on both sides, isn't it?
Yes, sir, it is. It's very toxic. I've never seen anything like this. I grew up back in the '60s, late '60s, and early '70s, going to college, and saw, as you did, the Weathermen and the Symbionese Liberation Army and so forth. But it was never this bad across a broad swath of our society.
And it doesn't look better on the horizon, does it?
No, because already both sides, I guess, are already sort of laying the groundwork for disputing the election results. And even if there may be problems in terms of vote counting or ballots received late, the fact that both sides are sort of indicating that they're not ready to accept the result of the election leads me to believe that we're in for a rough November.
Do you think people would deliberately vote twice, go to that trouble of mailing in a vote and then going to vote? Don't you say that'll be a very few?
Well, I don't know how many it would be, but I certainly, as a former prosecutor, know that people are capable of pretty much everything if they really want to accomplish something. So I wouldn't be surprised if we see that happening. And in what numbers, I don't know. But this push for universal mail-in voting bothers me a great deal, and I do think that it is rife for potential problems.
Why?
Well, because you have so many steps in the process. When you have people go to the poll and vote, you have basically one step. That person is going there. Their identity is verified here in Georgia by a government ID, and they cast their ballot. If you have millions of ballots mailed out in advance to whom you don't really know who's collecting those, how they're getting dropped off, when they're getting dropped off. There are so many more steps in the process, and every time there is a new step in that process, there is the potential for error or deliberate fraud.
At a rally in North Carolina, President Trump urged his supporters to gather at the polling places and monitor the election and warned them to expect thieving and stealing and robbing. Do you support that?
I don't think that kind of rhetoric really helps. Here in Georgia, and I suspect in most states, Larry, we do have a system of monitors at polling places. In addition to that, back when I was the U.S. Attorney here in Atlanta, and I know the Department of Justice continues this process, you have U.S. attorneys in every district in the country who are tasked by the Attorney General to monitor elections to make sure that there is no fraud from the standpoint of civil rights violations, for example, under federal law. I think that it's important for people to be aware of this, but leave it up to the authorities at the state and local level to make sure that there is proper monitoring at the polling places. I mean, we don't need to have vigilante monitoring, so to speak.
Bob, it seems likely that in your state, Georgia's 14th congressional district is going to elect Republican Marjorie Taylor Greene, an avowed QAnon supporter. President Trump has called her a future Republican star. What do you make of her?
I don't know her personally. I've met her, I've seen her, I've listened to her, and I've certainly read the stories that you're referring to there, and many others about some of her beliefs and statements. They're a little bit out there, no doubt about that, but I don't know her personally, Larry.
You've endorsed incumbent GOP Senator Kelly Loeffler in Georgia's November 3rd special election. Loeffler co-owns the WNBA team and criticized the Women's Basketball League for making Black Lives Matter such a big part of their season.
I think that sports, to the greatest extent we can, Larry, politics ought to be kept out of sports, whether it's the Women's Basketball League, whether it's the NFL, whether it's Major League Baseball. It really has become, unfortunately, very, very politicized, and I think that is something that takes away from the love of the sport. So I really don't like to see the sports moving in the direction, whether it's Black Lives Matter or something else. I would much prefer to see politics stay out of it.
Tell me, how is the term Black Lives Matter political?
Well, it's political because the leaders of it are both Marxist and very leftist, and they are making it very political. They are involving themselves deliberately in anti Trump activities. They are making statements that very clearly are political. And I think it really has very little to do with Black lives and has everything to do with politics matters nowadays.
But you would agree that Black lives do matter.
Certainly they do, and the lives of every police officer out there matters. But I don't think that the organization itself is doing a service to the lives of Black people or anybody in this country because they have become so radically politicized.
What do you think is going to happen on November 3rd?
Oh man, I mean it is so difficult to gauge, Larry. I think that right now I think that the race is tightening somewhat. I do think that if the unrest and the violence in cities continues, I think that that will be very much on the mind of voters. And unless the Biden Harris team comes out far more strongly than they have already to condemn the violence, saying it once or twice doesn't really cut it. I think that's going to hurt them unless they come out very, very strongly against this sort of violence and rioting and looting that we've seen.
How about the president's weaknesses, though?
Now, the president's weaknesses are himself. He's his own best reason for voting for him and his own worst enemy. I think his weakness is he needs to talk less and act more and act a little more presidential.
Are you worried that there might be big problems on November 3rd?
I am. I do think that there is great uncertainty even now, and I think that with the unrest and the violence that we've seen in the cities, I don't see that decreasing or diminishing before the election, and I think it'll increase, unfortunately.
Do you miss holding public office?
Some aspects of it, Larry. I do miss the work that I was able to engage in while I served on the Judiciary Committee in the House. It's a very important work, and it was right up my alley as a lawyer and as a former prosecutor. But I don't miss the environment nowadays in Washington. It is so unpleasant. It's just sucked all of the enjoyment out of the work up there, and that's very unfortunate.
Bob, thanks for being with us. We always appreciate your thoughts.
Thank you, Larry. Thank you for having me.